TOEFL! Before we start, don't forget to like and subscribe. Good luck!
Please read through the directions or skip ahead. Passage number 1. Listen to a conversation between a student and an academic advisor.
Hi, Sarah. I understand you wanted to discuss your academic plans. How can I help?
Yes, thanks for meeting with me. I'm having trouble deciding on a major. I thought I wanted to do biology, but now I'm not so sure.
It's completely normal to have doubts. Choosing a major is a big decision. You mentioned biology. What drew you to that initially?
Well, I've always liked science, especially learning about the environment. But after taking a couple of biology classes, I found myself struggling with some parts, like the cellular processes. I'm not sure if that's just me or if it's an indication I should consider something else.
That's fair. Biology can be quite demanding, especially when it comes to memorizing details and understanding complex systems. It's good that you're thinking carefully about it. Have you explored other fields that might interest you?
A little. I'm actually kind of interested in environmental science, but I'm not sure what kind of careers that could lead to. I also took an introductory psychology class, and I found it fascinating, especially the topics on human behavior.
Both environmental science and psychology are solid options. Environmental science is more interdisciplinary and can be a good fit for someone interested in science with a broader scope. Psychology, on the other hand, is focused on human behavior, as you mentioned, and can open up paths in healthcare, research, and even business.
I didn't know psychology had that many applications. That's helpful to know. I guess I also worry about job prospects. I don't want to choose a major and then find out there are no jobs for it.
That's understandable. Both environmental science and psychology have fairly good employment options, though it sometimes depends on whether you pursue advanced degrees. For instance, many psychology jobs require at least a master's degree, but there are also plenty of bachelor-level opportunities.
I see. And if I wanted to, I could add a minor to help diversify, right?
Absolutely. Many students add minors to complement their major, like a minor in business for psychology majors, or even in environmental policy for environmental science majors. Minors can help tailor your education to specific career goals.
That's a good idea. I'll think about that. Do you have any advice on how to decide between them?
Well, I'd suggest you speak with professors or students in both departments to get a feel for the courses and career paths. You could also try taking one more introductory course in each field next semester to see which one resonates with you more.
That makes sense. Thank you so much for your help. I feel a bit more confident about making this decision now.
You're very welcome, Sarah. Remember, you're not alone in this process, and we're here to support you every step of the way.
What is the main topic of the conversation? What was Sarah's initial reason for considering a major in biology? Why does the advisor suggest Sarah talk to professors and students in each department? What can be inferred about the advisor's opinion on psychology as a major? What does the advisor imply by suggesting a minor? Passage number 2. Listen to part of a talk in a biology class.
All right. So last time we discussed the basic components of ecosystems, but today I want to focus on the relationships between these components, specifically the interactions between different organisms and how energy flows through an ecosystem. You see, ecosystems are complex networks where each organism plays a role, and these roles are essential for the ecosystem's balance and function. Let's start with producers. Producers, such as plants, algae, and certain bacteria, are organisms that can produce their own food through photosynthesis. They're considered the foundation of any ecosystem because they provide the energy that sustains other organisms. Without producers, no ecosystem could function. These organisms convert sunlight into energy, which is then transferred through various levels of consumers. Now, moving on to consumers. Consumers depend on producers, either directly or indirectly, for their energy. They're categorized into primary, secondary, and tertiary consumers. Primary consumers, like herbivores, feed directly on producers. Secondary consumers, like small predators, feed on primary consumers. And at the top of the food chain, we have tertiary consumers, predators that feed on both primary and secondary consumers. This creates what we call a food web, a complex structure that shows the feeding relationships within an ecosystem. Another critical component is decomposers. Decomposers, like fungi and bacteria, break down dead organisms, returning essential nutrients to the soil. This recycling process supports producers, creating a continuous cycle of energy flow. Without decomposers, ecosystems would accumulate waste and run out of essential nutrients over time. Now, a key concept here is the flow of energy and the efficiency of this transfer. Typically, only about 10% of the energy at each trophic level is passed up to the next level. For instance, if a plant stores 100 calories of energy, only about 10 calories will be transferred to the herbivore that eats it, and just 1 calorie might reach a secondary consumer. This energy loss limits the number of consumers that can be supported in any ecosystem. Lastly, let's touch on biodiversity. Biodiversity refers to the variety of species within an ecosystem, and it's often an indicator of ecosystem health. High biodiversity generally means the ecosystem is stable and can recover from disturbances, like droughts or human impact, more easily. Low biodiversity, on the other hand, can make ecosystems more vulnerable to changes. So, to sum up, producers, consumers, and decomposers all interact in complex ways, and each component plays an essential role. Energy transfer is never 100% efficient, which affects the structure of food webs. And finally, biodiversity is a crucial factor that contributes to the resilience of ecosystems.
What is the main topic of the lecture? What example does the professor provide to explain the concept of energy transfer? Why does the professor mention decomposers in the ecosystem? What conclusion does the professor reach about biodiversity in ecosystems? What are two factors that affect the structure of food webs in ecosystems? What can be inferred about primary consumers based on the lecture? Passage number 3. Listen to a conversation between a student and a history teacher.
Hi, Maya. You wanted to talk about your paper on the Industrial Revolution?
Yes, Dr. Evans. I'm having some trouble narrowing down my topic. I know there's a lot to cover, but I want to focus on something specific that shows both the social and economic impacts of the Industrial Revolution.
That's a good approach. Well, one angle you might consider is the rise of factory towns and how they changed the lives of workers. As factories became the main centers for production, workers moved into towns that developed around them. It altered family structures, community life, and even working hours, making it a big change socially.
Right. I remember reading that factory work meant long hours under tough conditions, especially for children and women. But in terms of economic impacts, I'm not as sure. I know production increased, but is there something specific I could focus on?
Definitely. A key economic aspect was the shift from agrarian economies to industrial ones. Before factories, most people worked in agriculture and lived in rural areas. With industrialization, economies became more focused on manufacturing, which changed the distribution of wealth and created a new middle class. You could look at how this shift influenced society.
That's interesting. So it's not just about the machines and factories themselves, but how they influenced people's everyday lives. Maybe I should include a section on the impact on women too.
Absolutely. Women and children often made up a large part of the workforce, and their roles in society shifted significantly. Before industrialization, women mostly worked at home, but factory jobs created a whole new dynamic, as women had to balance work with family responsibilities. This led to discussions around workers' rights and eventually to labor reforms.
I hadn't thought about it that way. It sounds like there's a lot to cover.
It's a broad topic, but focusing on how industrialization affected family life and created economic shifts could give your paper a solid structure. Try to tie together social changes, like the role of women and the conditions in factory towns, with economic changes, like the new class system.
Thanks, Dr. Evans. This gives me a much clearer direction.
What is the main topic of the conversation? What example does the professor provide to explain the social impact of the Industrial Revolution? Why does the professor mention women and children in the workforce? What conclusion does the professor reach about the Industrial Revolution's impact on society? What are two factors the professor mentions that shaped people's lives during the Industrial Revolution? Passage number 4. Listen to a lecture in a psychology class.
So, these two terms are often used interchangeably, but they're distinct, and understanding their differences is crucial for grasping how we retain information. First, let's look at learning. Learning is defined as a relatively permanent change in behavior due to experience. Essentially, learning occurs when experiences lead to long-lasting changes in knowledge or behavior. For instance, when you learn to ride a bike, you are taking in information, practicing and developing skills that, hopefully, will stick with you. Unlike memory, which is often passive, learning requires active engagement and practice. Now, memory, on the other hand, is the process by which we encode, store, and retrieve information. Memory doesn't necessarily lead to changes in behavior, but it enables us to recall learned information, often at a later time. Think of memory as a storage unit for facts and experiences. Learning, then, is like the input, and memory is the storage. We categorize memory into three main types: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Sensory memory is extremely brief, lasting only milliseconds, but it's what allows us to retain impressions of sensory information, like the fleeting image of a scene we just saw. Short-term memory, often referred to as working memory, holds information temporarily for processing. For instance, when you're trying to remember a phone number just long enough to dial it, that's short-term memory in action. Long-term memory is more permanent, and it's where we store information for extended periods. The fascinating part is that memories in this part of our system can last a lifetime. Long-term memory itself is divided into two types: declarative and procedural. Declarative memory holds facts and events, things we consciously recall, like remembering a historical date or a list of vocabulary words. Procedural memory, on the other hand, is unconscious. It's how we remember how to do things like riding a bike or typing on a keyboard. Learning involves strategies that help to strengthen memory. This is where methods like rehearsal or repetition come in, repeating information over time so that it becomes ingrained. Another method is elaboration, where you add meaning or context to the material you're learning. Research shows that when students study by creating meaningful connections, they remember information more effectively. In addition to these techniques, we also have the concept of retrieval cues. These cues are like triggers that help us recall information stored in long-term memory. For example, a particular smell might remind you of a place you visited as a child. These retrieval cues strengthen our ability to access memories. So, to sum up, while learning and memory are closely related, they each play a unique role. Learning is the acquisition of new information or skills, and memory is the system that stores and retrieves that information. Our understanding of how learning strategies reinforce memory is critical in fields ranging from education to cognitive psychology.
What is the main topic of the lecture? What example does the professor provide to explain short-term memory? Why does the professor mention riding a bike? What conclusion does the professor reach about learning strategies? What are two factors that can help reinforce memory, according to the professor? What can be inferred about the professor's attitude toward learning techniques? Passage number 5. Listen to a conversation between two students discussing a group project.
Hi, Kaya. I wanted to talk about our group project for Professor Klein's sociology class. We're supposed to present on different social movements, right?
Yes, exactly. Professor Klein said we should focus on one specific movement, analyze its impact, and explain the factors that contributed to its success or failure. I think we agreed to look into the environmental movement.
Right. But there's so much to cover. We need to narrow it down. I thought we could focus specifically on how social media has affected the movement in recent years. It's such a huge factor now compared to a few decades ago.
That's a good angle. Social media has changed how people participate in and spread awareness about issues. Plus, we could look into the role of hashtags and viral challenges in mobilizing people, like, remember the hashtag Fridays for Future movement?
Absolutely. Hashtag Fridays for Future would be a great case study. That movement, led by young people, really picked up on social media and spread worldwide. It'd give us a clear example of how digital platforms can amplify a movement's reach. We should also consider how these online campaigns turn into real-life actions. I think that transition from online support to physical activism is key to a movement's success.
Good point. There's also the idea of slacktivism, where people show support online, but don't necessarily do anything in real life. Some people argue that social media activism can be superficial.
That's true. But on the other hand, there are cases where online support has led to actual policy changes, especially when large numbers of people participate. Maybe we could look at both perspectives?
Yeah, and we should also cover some statistics on how social media has impacted awareness and participation levels in environmental issues. There's a lot of data on how younger generations are more engaged because of these platforms.
Good idea. Do you think we should include any criticisms of the environmental movement? Like, how some people believe that individual actions alone aren't enough, and that real change needs to come from governments and corporations?
Definitely. That could lead into a discussion on the limitations of social media activism. If people think that just liking a post is enough, they might overlook larger structural issues that require more than just individual efforts.
So our main sections would be the role of social media in raising awareness, real-life activism versus online activism, and criticisms or limitations of the movement. Do we need to add anything else?
I think that covers it. Let's meet again next week to finalize our research and outline. I'll start looking for some articles and studies on social media's impact on activism, and we can divide up the work from there.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Kaya. I feel like we're on the right track with this. See you next week.
What is the main topic of the conversation? What example does Mark provide to explain the impact of social media? Why does Sarah mention slacktivism? What conclusion do the students reach about social media's role in the environmental movement? What are 3 topics the students plan to cover in their project? What can be inferred about Mark and Sarah's feelings about their project?
This is your answer key for passages 1 through 5. Remember to focus on the main ideas and tone of the lecture. Understanding the speaker's perspective will help you choose the right answers. Take notes on key details and listen for any changes in topic. These cues will guide you through each question and improve your overall score.